Okay. I would like to call the December 4th, 2024 work session to order. We do have a laydown here from Councilmember Dothett that's included with the packet for, I think, discussion as we go. We really can't amend the agenda or anything like that. So at the appropriate time, Alex, as you want to go. So with that, I think I'll just turn it over to our city manager and city finance director. If you want to go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, members of council. It's kind of hard to believe that we're 5 months into the current fiscal year and we're starting our plans for next fiscal year. But it is that time to start thinking about the 2026 budget. Generally, the last, it might be as many as 5 years now, this has been the process we've started with, where council establishes their goals for the administration's budget that we're going to prepare and submit. And I think it's a really useful process for us. Just it sets some goalposts out there that we can work to achieve. So this year, what I did when putting together these draft goals for your guys' discussion was we updated the goals. And then we also kind of put together a memo here that just kind of details what some of the thought process was in how those goals were crafted and put together. I do want to emphasize and stress that these goals are your goals, and you may totally disagree with some of that rationale and reasoning that's in there, and that's 100% appropriate. So at the end, I do want these to be your goals, so if you want to amend them in any way, we certainly can do that. If you'd like to propose different ones, we can certainly, we'll certainly assist in making that happen too. Having said that, I'm going to turn this over to the finance director to talk about the individual goals and just kind of walk through the discussion. And we certainly would entertain any questions along the way. And I want to make sure this is a two-way conversation. Thank you.
So thank you, Vice Mayor and council members, for taking time out of your day to be here with us again. As we, like City Manager said, we're moving forward with 2026 already, starting those planning phases. And you'll see these goals are a lot, much like last year. We've put a little more detail to them, talked about more how maybe it might meet the community needs in that, and that we want to keep in mind about being fiscally responsible for the community members as we prepare this budget. And so, it's kind of the big thing is looking at being responsible with our collections and making sure that we're charging appropriate fees for the services we provide, but also making sure that as we build these budgets that they're fiscally responsible and that everything kind of balances out and that we don't impact the level of our services to the community, that we maintain those levels that they're accustomed to receiving from the city. And so with that said, I'll kind of go right into goal one, and certainly at any point in time, if you got questions or comments, feel free to interrupt. So we talked about the fiscal responsibility about the taxes and how our goal is to maintain the current tax rates and stay within those, but that there might be flexibility, and as we work through this, that we have to acknowledge that there might have to be a change or not, and that but our goal is to stay within the current mill rates that we currently have today. The second goal is talking about employee compensation. One of our goals there is really to take into consider inflation.
David, if you don't mind, just before you go on to the second goal, just want to make sure, does anybody have any comments or on goal one before we move on? Just want to make sure that Mayor Gabriel is also, we haven't tested the system. He's up there. If You can
Yeah,
hear us, we can hear you.
Thank you, Henry. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any questions on goal one before we move on? Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make sure we didn't plow through.
No, by all means, thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor. So goal two, we were looking at the employee compensation. We want to connect that to, keep connected to inflation and look at that, look at the CPI and take that into consideration with cost of living increases. But also we want to make sure that we compare and that we stay competitive with other employers in the community or nearby communities. And that was one thing with our compensation study last year. We came out, pretty good. There were some communities that have had significant increases, but when we looked at those communities, we identified that they were actually some of the ones that were lower on the pay scale out of that study. And we're seeing them actually trying to play catch up with us at this point, or other. So that's one of our considerations there, is to make sure that we stay competitive and that we don't get in a situation where we're having employees leave because we're not, and that we maintain the good employees that we have here at the city. Any questions, comments on that, Cole?
No, seeing none.
So goal number 3 was looking at the cost of our employee health, dental, and life insurance, to review those benefits. I think we had a meeting relatively recently where we talked about that, and that this year we're faced with 11.2% of an increase. So during the budget process, we want to look at that. A few years back, the goal was to look at the employee cost share adjustment and move that up to 15%. We're currently at 13%. That'll be something that during the process we take a look at that and look at whether it's time to move that up to, say, 14%, or that we continue maybe working towards that goal. But again, we still want to keep in line with kind of goal number 2 there, remaining competitive with other communities, and so that we are able to maintain our employees. And again, keeping in line, being comparative to other public employees or employers.
A quick question, we're not, we know what the increase is going to be come budget time at this point?
Right.
Okay.
Vice Mayor, actually, we do, so we're on a calendar year renewal for our insurance. So we know what our rates are going to be through December 31st of 2025. We will be projecting some change midway through the upcoming fiscal year, because fiscal year 26 runs through June 30, 2026. So there will be some amount of an estimate in there, but we know going in what our rates are going to be for the first 6 months of the fiscal year.
And I do recall the discussion before, but this is unusual for us to have it this close, because I believe just before the budget's finalized, we usually get the renewal, or I've had in the past.
So we did switch a couple of years ago to a calendar year renewal rather than a fiscal year renewal. And we did that. There was interest expressed by employees to explore a health savings account option. We currently use a health reimbursement arrangement option, which are very different, but the health savings account options are based on a tax year, so the calendar year. So aligning our renewal with the calendar year was the first step in being able to move towards that. And this year, January 1 of 2025, we are offering an HSA option to employees now. I believe, and Ms. Randall could correct me if I'm wrong, about 10% of our employees, a little less than 10%, I think, have opted to go to the HSA plan rather than stay with our traditional HRA plan. And we think that's probably going to grow over time. It's a pretty significant switch, and I think it's going to take time for some employees to educate themselves and get comfortable, but I think we'll see more make that switch in the future.
Any questions on goal number 3 before we move on?
Okay, and the goal number 4 was just talking about efficiency of operations and kind of the continuation to look where we can capture cost savings or efficiencies with how we do business. And part of this process is the inclusion of performance measures so that we can kind of look year over year. And so that the department heads, they kind of have measuring sticks, if you will, that they can look at and look and see how they're doing and look for ways to improve. Because it's just kind of one of those things, kind of always try to do more with less type of thing, but to be efficient and still provide the same level of service. Any questions on that?
Any questions on goal number 4? Guess on goal number 5.
Okay. So goal number 5 is looking at capital project prioritization and investment. This is looking at maintaining our capital and our infrastructure and ensuring that we're constantly replacing and refreshing things, that we're not, kicking the can down the road to where suddenly we have to come out, with these major expenses because we have major failures. And so this starts that conversation. I know it's something that our Public Works Director, he's already in the process of putting together what we're coming to the table with for capital projects for the year. But then this also starts, us putting things into the system with the state and identifying priorities and that, reaching out to our legislative entities and getting their support and looking for ways that we can fund some of these projects so that it just, helps us with our budget and helps us with our costs for the city and for our citizens.
No,
Any
looking
questions?
around the room, I guess go on. Thank you.
Goal number 6 is just for us to really review and look at rates and charges and fee adjustments. And this is going to be something that, as we go through the budget process and meet with each of the department heads, for them to have reviewed and look at and bring to the table any changes that they feel are needed or necessary. We've kind of seen some of that over the years. We saw that, in the last budget cycle with some changes over at the rec center, things like that. It could be that maybe we haven't had an increase in fees for a number of years, and it's time to look at what our costs are for providing some of those services that are really unique to the individual and not necessarily the citizens as a whole, and that the people that are taking advantage of these services are the ones that are kind of supporting those services. We always look at vintage point and look at rent increases, making sure that we're staying, competitive with the market. At the same time, not, having large increases that become a burden for the people that we have living in that facility, that we look at it year by year and look at keeping that sustainable as well and affordable. So,
Any questions on goal number 6? I guess I have a question generally. If, there's programmed increases, vintage point might be one, and how that goes, and water and sewer. Is there anything that the finance department or the city is looking at that might pop up in the budget for rate increases?
I would say I don't know at this. Oh, sorry. I would say I don't know at this point in time. That's something we'll be looking at and we'll be discussing with the department heads as we look at each department and look at the different revenues that each department has as to what type of changes. And yeah, maybe we need to look at, should this be some type of annual increase? Do we tie it to CPI? How do we look at that? And so that'll be part of the discussions we have in the budget preparation.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so if you want to move on to goal 7, operating fund reserves.
So the operating fund reserves, this is where we look at maintaining 50% of fund balance being at least 50% of our operating costs, so that if we had some type of major expense, or let's say for some reason there was some, significant decrease in revenue collections for some reason, that we have time to adjust and adapt to those changes, and that we're not, kind of hamstrung with a huge expense or with a, significant lack of revenue, that if we're operating so tight that we don't have any ability to adjust and make modifications to our operations to handle that. And we want to look at, one-time spending and making sure that, one-time spending is something that's a one-time cost, not a recurring cost, and that we haven't, created a deficit in the future because we have something that we did that's now a recurring cost as opposed to just a one-time spend. And so that's where we really want to look at maintaining those fund levels to where they're healthy and that we stay financially stable as a city.
I believe that was the last call. Any questions on any of that, or administration have anything else they want to, you have more you want to add?
Yeah, I would say that we kind of just, this is kind of some of the reasoning and stuff behind the goals, but then at the end here, we did lay out just the specifics of the goals.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on, that would bring us down to council comments. I know Councilmember Dothett has something at least here, because you have it really down.
Yeah, so this is just one of the things I brought up as possibly making a goal if we can get support behind it. It's our council appropriated grants that we offer every year. We have a list that kind of just roll into the budget without not a lot of application. We don't really see applications, just kind of, there's not a lot of process, it seems like to me, on that. And what I was hoping to do about this is possibly see if staff might be able to come up with an application process and set some parameters to make this a little bit of a cleaner process to me, and set guidelines and some kind of a policy and procedure in place for that, to where, the applicants have a little more skin in the game, to where we don't just have these rolling grants that they're not asking for every year. They just get awarded. And then possibly looking into maybe increasing the amount of money that's out there. I'm not sure, but reviewing these a little bit closer in the next budget cycle. But the biggest thing that I was trying to bring up with this was seeing if staff could come up with some ideas for the application process and implementing a new process for people or agencies to apply for these grants. Something to where, and like some of the ideas that's come up, might have where they give an annual, if they get our recipients of the grant, they're required to give us an annual at the end of the year before they apply again, a report on what did these funds go to, or do they still need them, or how did it work out? Something about their agency in that report I think would be helpful too. But that's what this was about. So I'll open it up for any other discussion on that.
Yeah, my thought is, excuse me, that it probably doesn't fit into the budget process. It just, as far as the budget book goes. And it might be something that would be, would work with administration, but a discussion item at a council meeting. And kind of identify all of these that we're talking about. I'm thinking of one in particular, but there's probably several others. And I know that we have policies already in place, so it might be a modification to some other document. Does that kind of fall into what you're?
Yes, I just wanted to be a goal that it goes into staff's awareness for the budget cycle. I'm not exactly sure where to fit into these goals minded, but to know that it's something that we might want to increase or decrease, or it's on the mind there to help with that. But that's where that was coming up, is later on in the budget cycle too, but just know that it's out there, that's something to work on. The other thing did have questions was, we're planning back to these goals with the tax increases. I know we had discussed, this might be for staff on this, the goal being to not increase our taxes, of course, but how far, and I know we've talked about it, I've been told, how much longer do we have on our savings that we've been utilizing to help with the budget? I think it was the COVID funds. When is that timeline coming up before we would be running out of those? If they could ask. I couldn't remember the timeline on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Dossett, members of council. So that's I'm going to try not to go full Terry on you here and give you a extremely long-winded answer, but that's a really complex question. So what I want to stress is that our current general fund operating budget is a sustainable budget. So we currently, under our current revenue streams, have sufficient funding for our operational activity. What is being eroded or has been being eroded is our ability for capital expenditures using those revenue streams. I believe last year's budget, we had about $800,000 worth of capacity in the general fund for project-related costs. The reserves we have in the general fund that council's been setting aside, that is in excess of our fund balance policy for capital projects, I believe wasn't able to fully fund 5 years worth of our proposed or planned capital projects as of last year. It's probably shrunk to around 3.5 to 4 years. So we still have, a fair amount of reserves. I do want to stress that our current budget can support our operations. That's one of the key focuses we always have. That's the difference between recurring expenses and one-time expenses. And I think it's a very important distinction we have to make. So in no way do I think our budget is strained to the point where we're going to be forced to make tax increases for operations. It is of concern, though, if you're depleting your ability for capital projects and, that long-term maintenance type, those expenditures for long-term maintenance on your infrastructure. That can't continue. That is proverbially kicking the can down the road. So that's what we really need to focus on. So the amount of reserves that we have to fund future capital projects has been diminishing, and the amount of capacity that the general fund has to continue to fund capital projects has been slowly eroding too. So I think, to answer your question, I think we still have time. It's something that we need to be looking at and be very conscious of. And those are great questions to ask, but I want to emphasize, I don't think the sky is falling, and we're not in that position.
Thank you. And that's kind of what I was looking at. I was like, we keep seeing every year, just a prime example is with healthcare costs. We've been status quo for 10 plus years on our tax rates, but everything else expenditure wise is increasing around us. And I'm just trying to see where the give and take is going to be, and at what point are we starting to see that we might need to start looking at changes ahead of the time so we can start building up those savings, or being eligible to have more one-time expenditures in the future for maintenance costs and stuff coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you again, Councilmember Dothert. The one thing I want to stress, though, too, is that while I agree with you 100%, our mill rate has not changed, our sales tax rate has not changed for 10 years. Individuals' tax bills have changed. We've seen growth in assessed values. We've seen growth in taxable sales for sales tax. So our revenues have been growing. I would argue that sometimes the cost of inflation and our costs have accelerated are exceeding what our revenue growth has been. I think we're also seeing pressure on city budgets for higher levels of service. Sometimes community members are requesting. I think we've seen, things being pushed down to the city level from the state government in the way they're doing business, and things that they're no longer doing that still creates an expectations by taxpayers. So it's really, like I said, that's a really complex question that you brought up, and we're going to do our best in this budget process to help everybody understand that and make sure we're still heading in a positive direction. I think the city of Kenai is known for responsible budgets, and it's my absolute goal that we're going to produce another one this year.
And thank you for that. And yes, that's one of the things I've always been proud of the city is it's always been fiscally responsible, for sure. The thing that just always makes me a little nervous is infrastructure and buildings and roads, and our public utilities are starting to show age, and how much money we start setting aside for those future costs could be an alarming expense if we have to start doing some major repairs. And that's just what I'm looking out to our future, one to preemptively make us decisions on that if we can, before all of a sudden we're caught in the hard spot with some major repairs that have to be done. Thank you on that one. One other thing, if I can, that was brought up, and it goes back to the fees and the goals on the fees. And with you being able to possibly, and this might, I was talking with Parks and Rec Director about this, was to help with the fee differentiation, specifically with the rec center, was possibly like software updates to be able to help track user groups and stuff like that, to help with those fee allocations might be something to look into. A new software program over there to help for collecting fees, but then it also could help collect data and help with those determination of that. So that was one of the things I was talking about.
Mayor Gabriel, you've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I was just going to make a comment about Councilmember Douthat's laydown regarding grants to other agencies. And, the way I think we've done it before, Terry, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we've sort of been defaulted in including them in the budget because they were in the prior year budget. And I know there's been discussions about, and I think at one time we didn't, we sort of withdrew a grant request from a previous budget because the proposers or the folks there that were receiving that were just sort of not showing up. And I sort of get like, hey, if you want to, come and ask the city for a grant, you should be able to, show up and answer questions and things like that. A possibility might be for administration to extend an invitation for folks to come in address council at some, probably maybe either a meeting before our budget work session or maybe at the budget work session. But that will at least give us a chance to interact with those folks. That was just my 2 cents. I know it was just a lay down kind of threw at us, but it makes sense. I think I like the idea of folks coming in and, requesting at least the continuation or at least give us a report of, how things are going with the money that they're getting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Any further questions of staff? Okay, that brings us to public comments. Is there anybody in the audience or online that wishes to speak or have saying, I'm getting a no from the clerk. So that brings us to adjournment. With no further business, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.